The 7 classes that make up League's roster serve to categorize the 150 plus champions based on similarities in playstyle, win condition, and the like. That's actually something I feel like isn't given enough credit for. If we ignore the rhetoric of everything being 200 years, it's interesting just how unique every member of the cast really is, even if they have similar themes. I made a number of videos talking about each of the 7 classes, going further in depth on a few of them such as the Wardens, Juggernauts, and I guess the Artillery Mages. Speaking of mages, there's another subclass that I think deserves a deeper look as they effectively represent the magic damage equivalent of AD carries and by extension hypercarries. So let's talk about control mages, also known as battle mages. Just a heads up, I'm going to be using the terms interchangeably, so for this video, battle mages and control mages are the same thing. Something else I think deserves a deeper look into would be how you can earn free stuff while playing League of Legends, and an easy way to do that is with today's sponsor, Repeat.gg. Repeat's a website that features tournaments for popular games like Fortnite, Dota 2, PUBG, and of course, League. You can enter multiple tournaments at the same time and results are tracked automatically. There's a bunch of events happening at all times, each with their own prize pool of coins that you can use to redeem gift cards in their store, from Amazon to Riot Points to V-Bucks, eShop gift cards, etc. They give away over $60,000 in cash worth of coins per month in tournaments, and are actually aiming to increase the total prize pool month per month. Once entering a tournament, Repeat monitors your in-game statistics for ranked games and assigns a score to those matches based on your performance, which is then compared to with other players. They have a few challenge events too, such as the monthly support championship, which as you can tell tracks how well you perform as a support. It's a really cool platform that gives you a little extra incentive to play your best. So for those of you who are actively playing every day, check out my link on screen or in the description and you can earn yourself a couple of goodies to make you feel better about being hard stuck. Thanks again to Repeat for sponsoring the video, but for now, back to control mages. The mage class is the only one to feature 3 subcategories, primarily because they're the largest class in the game through general designation. While physical damage users can be split off into the fighter, assassin, and marksman class based on playstyle, anyone who primarily scales off of ability power and has a playstyle revolving around casting abilities is considered a mage. Technically speaking, there are AP fighters like Mordekaiser and AP assassins like Katarina, but if we go back to the traditional motif of casting spells or using magic, all of those can be described as a mage. To accommodate the sheer size of its roster, mages are divided into 3 subclasses instead of the usual 2. In case you want to learn more about that, I suggest you watch my video analyzing the class overall. Contrasting from regular attackers in that they exert most if not all of their pressure through their moveset, the implications behind that idea are what drive the balance of caster champions as a whole. Throughout a game, abilities are typically stronger than auto attacks if we go by individual uses. Annie's Disintegrate does 220 base plus 80% ability power and damage at max rank. 99% of the time, her Q will do more damage than a single non-empowered auto attack from any champion at that stage in a match, along with additional properties like more attack range or in Annie's case a potential stun. Naturally, this is offset by the fact that abilities are not as readily available as auto attacks, barring a few exceptions. That's the rule of thumb for mages, powerful abilities at the cost of dealing almost no damage from autos. At least, that's how it is for artillery and burst mages without empowered autos. Control mages don't really follow this rule though. Unlike their peers, they have deceptively good sustained damage output, almost rivaling that of marksmen and skirmishers. Unlike them, however, instead of overwhelming raw damage, control mages are dangerous for, as the name implies, control. Most if not all of them are notorious for their ability to render entire zones of the battlefield hazardous, establishing territorial control and or placing the enemy team at a disadvantage if they're grouped up together, something that would otherwise be a sound choice. Simply put, the win condition of a control mage is to control the fight by way of their massive area coverage along with dishing out as much damage as possible. They can do this either by applying said damage in a wide area or by zoning off enemies, reducing their threat capacity, which indirectly boosts yours. A prime example of this would be Anivia, one of the most well-known control mages in the game. While slow and highly susceptible to rushdown playstyles like that of divers and assassins, Anivia's shining virtue is her ability to single-handedly dominate entire teamfights through lasting pressure. Crystallize instantiates a wall of ice wide enough to seal off entry and exit points in various parts of the rift, letting her use Glacial Storm, dealing massive damage over time and slowing anyone trapped in it. For many champions, getting stuck in her ultimate without flash or some way to break the channel spells certain death, and so long as she has the mana to foot the bill, she can maintain the storm for as long as she wants. In other words, Anivia is a mage with no downtime on her pressure. Other members of the cast have persistent aura-type damage output as well. Swing's Demonic Ascension is for all intents and purposes a Glacial Storm radiating from himself. Same with Karthus and Aurelian Soul. You don't necessarily have to have lasting pressure in that sense to be considered a battle mage though. There are others like Malzahar, Cassiopeia, Talia, and Victor with significantly less overall coverage, but they're still labeled as control mages on account of doing the opposite, deterrence. Cassio's Miasma has unremarkable damage output, but that's not what it's supposed to do. Those massive poison clouds prevent anyone from using any mobility spells of any kind while trapped under there, rendering entire classes like divers and assassins helpless. Talia's Unraveled Earth has a similar property of deterrence. It doesn't prevent you from using any mobility spells, but it punishes you for doing so by dealing a huge amount of damage and stunning you if you dash or displace through it. Malzahar's Nethergrasp, while a single target ability, can psychologically pressure multiple members of the enemy team, as the threat of being suppressed tends to ironically be more influential than the usage of the ability itself. Whether exercised offensively or defensively, every control mage has something in their kit that grants a situational and/or positional advantage over the enemy team. On that note, I should clarify that champions who aren't registered as battle mages can still fit the criteria of being a control mage. Several members within the specialist class possess the same ability of occupying large areas, as they were once called the zoner class before being renamed to specialist. Zillion's Time Bomb is a classic zoning ability. You also have Heimerdinger's turrets, Teimo's mushrooms, Singe's poison, Azir's sand soldiers, Fiddlesticks and Cannon super ultimates, and Gangplank's barrels. In fact, Gangplank, despite scaling off of AD, is the closest thing to a physical damage control mage in this game. There's bound to be some degree of overlap, that's part and parcel of archetypes. The controller class, more famously known as supports, also feature a few cast members like Zyra, Morgana, and Renata, whose gameplay revolves around establishing control in a battlefield. The same can also be said for a few artillery and burst mages. You could make the argument that Xerath, Vel'Koz, and Ziggs' impressive range can be utilized as cover fire for their teammates, thus technically entailing zone control. Burst mages like Orianna, Veigar, and Brandt demonstrate the property of zoning enemies away in the same regard. For the sake of maintaining organization, I'm going to primarily focus on the battle mage subclass, but a lot of what I say does apply to the outliers. Just like how Marksmen give up mobility for outstanding DPS, or how skirmishers give up range or dueling potential, control mages forfeit range and/or mobility in favor of DPS and area control, and it's well worth the trade-off, as they have arguably the best mid-range pressure out of any class in the game, to the point where I'd go so far as to say towards the late game they're equally as threatening as hypercarries, but with none of the downsides or stigmas that accompany them. Hypercarries are among the most controversial group of champions in all of League's history. If they make it past their most vulnerable stage of the game, usually early game, they're almost unstoppable if your team is ill-equipped to handle them. If they fall behind, however, they offer nothing of value to the team, as they're nothing if not damage. Champions like Master Yi, Kog'Maw, Fiora, Kassadin, Kayle, etc. Control mages in theory are socially acceptable hypercarries. They have comparable DPS to traditional hypercarries, but with a more generous margin for error. If you imagine a standard hypercarry marksman like Vayne for instance, why is she a hypercarry? For one, she's one of the few marksmen in the game with really solid dueling potential thanks to her immaculate single target damage, self-peel in the form of Condemn and Final Hour stealth, and Tumble for instant reposition. Few champions, if any, can match Vayne's combat pressure against a single target, but that's the caveat, single target. True, against that one champion, I don't care if you're a squishy Soraka or a 200,000 HP Scion, you're getting destroyed. But she can only efficiently attack one person at a time. There's a hard limit to what Vayne is able to contribute for her team. Or rather, her pressure is quantifiable, albeit substantial in the right conditions. Now let's look at someone like Cassiopeia, considered by many as an AP marksman in light of her Twin Fangs. Cassio's damage output doesn't go as far as an AD carry in the late game since Twin Fangs can only scale via ability power, whereas auto attacks scale off of attack damage, attack speed, crit chance, and on-hit effects. But she has two extremely devastating abilities at her disposal, Miasma and Petrifying Gaze. At the end of the day, Cassio lives and dies by her damage output. If she falls behind early, she won't be as much of a threat, but the presence of her utility spells allows her to maintain a higher bottom line than the likes of Master Yi or Vayne. Miasma's area coverage and grounding status disregards how far ahead or behind you are, meaning for the duration of that game, she can and will pose a threat to anyone who relies on mobility to execute their game plan. Petrifying Gaze is a 2-second stun to anyone directly facing her. A well-timed cast of her ultimate is enough to win you the entire team fight. Granted, not all battle mages have this kind of fallback. Champions like Karthus, Rumble, and Vladimir are strictly meant to deal damage. Then again, it's how they deal damage that still renders them more viable than others. Control mages are known for their extensive area coverage, implying their damage can theoretically affect multiple members of the enemy team. What makes a champion like Fiddlesticks so dangerous is that his ultimate, on top of hitting like a truck, can hit multiple members of the enemy team at once. A single target ultimate like Syndra's Unleashed Power concentrates all of its power on one enemy, but that means there's a cap to what it can do, up to 1330 plus 140% AP damage to one person. I mean, usually that's enough to one-shot the enemy squishy anyway, but you get the idea. Control mages have so much AoE damage and pressure that in a head-on 5v5, they can still break the enemy team in half, even if they're down a full item, so long as they layer their spells correctly. They may not be as consistent or instantaneous as Fiora or Kassadin, but the potential is still there, and we are seeing a lot of it more as of late. The biggest weak point affecting the class is their lack of front-loaded damage on a conceptual level. While they have some of the highest damage potential out of any class in the game, it's kept in check by being spread out over time. Let's go back to the comparison with Syndra for a moment. Unleashed Power deals up to 1330 plus 140% AP magic damage to a single target over the span of a second, give or take. To be fair, she needs 4 existing dark spheres on the ground to get the full damage, but the attack itself is point and click and almost instantaneous. Meanwhile, Rumble's ultimate, the Equalizer, deals up to 1400 base plus 175% AP to anyone standing in the area. Assuming all 5 members of the enemy team are getting roasted, this ability can do as much as 7000 base plus 875% AP in total damage. That's assuming you're able to keep them in that spot for 4.5 seconds, which is highly unlikely. Between Season 7 and 12, we were in a burst-centric meta, where champions who prioritized front-loaded damage were favored over those who took a while to unload everything. That's why I made a Why No One Plays episode for more than half of all battle mages. But thanks to the durability update and to a lesser extent the changes to mythic items, they've been on the rise once more. The increased durability across the board gave way to 2 positive benefits for control mages. First, the decreased potency of burst damage means a lot more games are surviving past laning phase without one side having a decisive advantage over the other. Out of the 3 subclasses, battle mages have the weakest early game. Their shorter attack range exposes them to far more danger than they want to be, whereas artillery mages can stay far enough away to farm safely, while burst mages have decently strong laning phases for conspicuous reasons. The durability update allows battle mages to make it past laning phase and to their crucial 2 or 3 item power spikes more consistently. Second, teamfights last longer now. That's an indirect buff to DPS champions, and battle mages consist almost entirely of sustained damage. Even though its burst is still prevalent, it's not out of control to where champions have enough firepower to nuke your health bar twice over. Battle mages now have time to react and adapt to the situation. They may not strike first, but they're certainly masters at striking second if they get the chance. Very reminiscent of how the Juggernaut class likes to operate. So far, everything I said makes it sound like battle mages are these hidden OP secret bosses that everyone's sleeping on. And, I don't know about you, but they kind of are. This is purely anecdotal, but I find myself having better experiences with battle mages than their sister classes. The way they dominate entire teamfights on their own in the mid to late game is an insurance policy that helps me feel more confident as the game goes on. That might just be due to my penchant for early game champions, but you can't lie that having a Victor, a Nivea, or Karthus on your team presents the option of playing the long con. That's essentially what battle mages are, an insurance policy. Worst case scenario, unless the player operating them has room temperature IQ, and I guess in fairness there's a lot of them in solo queue, they'll scale better than the majority of the cast. If that's the case, why aren't they as popular as other groups like divers or assassins? That mostly stems from the question of agency, or lack thereof. Control mages are inherently position-based. Sure, they can occupy a lot of space with their abilities at once, but that position remains fixed, and it's hard to extend their range. In my Why No One Plays episodes on Rumble, Anivia, Victor, and Asol, I talked about how their staggering DPS is often hamstrung by fights having a tendency to change locations, or how most popular champions these days have enough mobility to dodge all of your abilities. Frankly speaking, I think that's highly exaggerated, but it certainly feels disappointing to experience at times. Control mages are like juggernauts in that it's rare for them to act first given their shorter range and slower rate of fire. League as a game is designed in favor of striking first. Best defense is a strong offense and all. If you can one-shot the enemy team, then you don't have to worry about a counterattack. Control mages have more defensive capabilities than either artillery or burst, but they're still mages. They can't withstand the same level of punishment as a juggernaut because the selection of AP bruiser items is more limited, and they're not exactly beefy tanks either. You could make a case that prior to version 12.10, battle mages were seen as way too risky relative to the reward. Why bother playing a slow burner when you could play someone who's fast and carries all the same? Fortunately though, with the game finally slowing down a bit after all these years, I think we're gonna see more of them. Every mid-scope update on a mage so far was intended to extend their combat pressure in some way. The alterations to Ahri's Spirit Rush has raised the question of if she's more of a battle mage than a burst now. Meanwhile, Talia and Swain were updated to adapt to the growing frequency of protracted teamfights. In the recent development showcase, Aurelion Sol's rework is also giving him more reliable sustained damage with his new fire laser thingamadoohickey, and I'm willing to bet Syndra and Nico's midscopes are going in that direction too. It's apparent that not only is the player base adding more sustained DPS champs to their roster, but also Riot themselves. Season 13 might very well be the era of control mages, who knows? What do you guys think about the class? Do you think I'm hyping them up too much, or do you agree that they're heavily underrated? Share your thoughts in the comments down below. We're gonna end things off here though, so if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also consider following me on Twitter at VarsVarum, joining my Discord server, and if you'd like to support me further, I have a Patreon page that grants benefits to all 3 of my channels, Vars, Vars2, and Vars3, so take a look if you feel like it. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.